still raining outside, so I'm back inside my garage, and I'm going to go ahead and swap over the new parts and rebuild this assembly itself. For the most part, my water pump front cover appears to be in really good condition. No type of cracks or anything. Everything seems pretty good. I've seen pictures and videos of other people where they had to change just out the front housing and had cracks all over, and a lot of times just from the housing cracking, they had pretty bad coolant leaks. So look like we may have been good. I'm not sure if this is original or if someone swapped it out before, but it is a Volkswagen Audi part. Maybe original and it just happened to be in good shape. We'll go ahead and take these bolts out. These are E8. Luckily I have a couple different sets of the E sockets itself, and that'll fit here to remove the water pump and separate that from the front cover, as well as the same bolt E8 will separate the thermostat housing also. Let's go ahead and see if we can get this assembly put back together. I doubt if the rain decreases, we'll have to just pick back up on the outside tomorrow. Well, I spoke a little too soon. The housing was in good shape until you go to loosen up the bolts. As I loosen up the bolts, it formed a small hairline crack in a couple different locations right there. These bolts was very tight, and there's another crack right there. So it formed a hairline crack in 2 locations. I'm not going to even take the risk or gamble, so I just ordered another complete assembly online. I guess I'll have this for a spare, but I'm still curious to see if this have a metal impeller or if all of them come with metal impellers. I don't know. I already removed the rest of the hardware, and a lot of these screws were very difficult to get out. I had to grab another set, a shorter stubby set, and use an extension just to get one of the bolts off that was in pretty tight location with the thermostat housing. But everything's out for the most part, and I'm kind of curious now, so I'm going to go ahead and split this apart and take a look on the inside, see if we can see anything or possibly root cause any failure. The thermostat itself, I don't see anything obvious that's sticking out, but there's a possibility the thermostat could have failed or it could have been a water pump. But either way, I'm swapping out both. I separate the housing, and I can clearly tell that this is the plastic impeller. You can tell from the difference in tone. This one, it appears to be good for the most part. I locked on some pliers on the back part of the shaft and tried to see if the impeller would slip. A lot of times, I mean, that's a rough estimate. Sometimes you can't tell unless it gets really hot, and then from heat expansion it'll slip. But most times, a lot of the plastic impellers, you'll have a hairline crack and it'll easily spin on the shaft. But this is very tight on there, so I'm going to say pretty much the root cause may have been the thermostat itself. I seriously doubt if it was any type of water pump failure as far as this slipping on the shaft. I will install the whole new assembly. I ordered a complete entire assembly, the housing and everything, and I'll just install that as a unit and save this one with the metal impeller for the future built motor for that. The block that I have planned for it with the JE forged pistons and stronger H-beam rods, I'll save that for that build and put that on the shelf for another time. This had another leak also. As you can see right here, it appears to have been leaking oil also out of this port. There's oil coming from the engine also, and that keeps lubrication going through here for spinning the water pump impeller. But apparently this port, I guess if the seal goes bad, and one way that you can tell if it goes bad, if it starts weeping oil through that hole right there, and that port appears to have given up the ghost. Most of them have that type of port on there, so this was pretty much a wrap for this thing anyway. We'll just go ahead and wait for the new part to come in and pick back up on playing with the Motec for the Audi TT. I finally have some parts that came in for the S5, and we're going to pick back up on the water pump replacement. So let's do a quick recap. I ordered originally just the water pump itself. This has a metal impeller, pretty good quality from what I've seen so far, and I ordered a separate thermostat housing. the engine did a boil over when I got in the driveway. It was starting to bubble up in the expansion tank. It didn't get to the point where it overheated yet, but it was starting to get pretty hot. I decided to go ahead, replace the radiator, which the integrity was being compromised, and replace the water pump and thermostat housing while I'm in there. Unfortunately, when I went to separate the original water pump, which appeared to be in fairly good shape until I started to remove the hardware, it formed a few hairline cracks. And let's see, like right there in the housing part that connects to the thermostat part. So with that being said, unfortunately, I couldn't find this piece separately. That's all I really needed, but well, things happen. So from that point, I decided, well, let's spend some extra money, unfortunately, and get a whole complete assembly, which I probably should have done from the beginning. Live and learn. I would have did that from the beginning if I knew that, but I don't know if this newer water pump comes with a metal impeller. It did come with extra gaskets, which is great. And to remove this assembly, you definitely need your E-sockets. I have short, stubby E-sockets. The shorter ones definitely came in handy for getting to some of the hard to reach locations on the water pump. Like, for example, this section right here is definitely pretty challenging to reach. So the little stubby, that came in handy with a swivel extension as far as removing that part right there. We're going to go ahead and double check just in case. I do not want to install this in the car and find out that these extra gaskets, or this particular gasket right here, the larger one, is not in place. That would be a nightmare. This gasket pretty much is the same. That seals around the water pump housing. So I'm pretty sure that may be in here, but we're going to double check. So it's better safe than sorry. It's not going to take much extra time just to double check that while everything's out. At least this also did come with the O-rings also. These O-rings would go along pretty much the back side right here where this is pushed into the engine block itself. Seal around here as well as here. So that's great that it did include this extra hardware, but we will remove that just to double check and make sure we don't have any problems. Other than that, we'll jack this back up and I'll explain a few other things. Let's go ahead and get this prepped up. I only have a few hours to work on this, and then we're going to take off, have prior arrangements, and we'll just see if I can at least get the water pump installed today. That is my objective, and then I can pick back up on the radiator and try to put the rest of the vehicle back together tomorrow. Before I jack the car up, there's a few other things I would like to point out. The engine was definitely very greasy and dirty. If you've seen from the previous video, a lot of oil accumulation down here, and a lot of that came from the valve cover gaskets that just leaked oil and just built up. One of my fears, if you watched the previous video, was I said, oh my goodness, hopefully I didn't have a crankshaft seal that was leaking, because oil just kept seeping down, and I removed the harmonic damper just to be sure that no oil was just oozing out of this crankshaft seal, and it appears to be good. I discovered once I removed that and lowered the car, a lot of the harmonic damper, after I pressure washed it, did have a big clunk of oil that got backed up and built up behind it from pressure washing it. All this stuff just washed off and accumulated on the backside of the harmonic damper, and it was just oozing some of the oil out, as well as these ports right here. Let's see if we can shine a light in here just to get a better look. Right there, that port right there, that opening, and there's one on each side right over here as well. That opening allowed oil just to drain down from this cavity, from this valley right here between the cylinder heads. And it's good that it has that. You don't want a lot of oil, dirt, water accumulation in that area. You can only imagine in the wintertime, if you ever had water built up on your engine, and to have all of this freeze up, it can damage components. It's good that it had those holes there, but it was just actually seeping the oil off. I'll clean this back up a little bit. When I lowered it down, it drained a lot more from out of that valley onto the bar of the engine. But I wanted to kind of point that out before I get back in here and start the process of trying to install the water pump. I had also put some plugs in here when I was pressure washing it. I did not want to blow any type of water or anything inside there and to get into the oil pickup and get into the oil pan. Wanted to make sure that was protected also. One of the big things you want to use caution when reinstalling the water pump, installing your new water pump. You want to make sure, whether you're using the used one, or the original one, or a new one, you definitely want to take care to make sure that your shaft is aligned up properly. On the back side of your water pump is a square shaft. And you want to make sure that that is definitely lined up properly. I'll point out that on the back of the water pump. And it's actually a hex shaft. So back on the back side of this water pump is a hex style shaft that rotates this to keep the water pump impeller spinning while the engine is turning. You want to be sure that this is lined up properly before you run your 4 bolts. The 2 here and the 2 here to draw this into the engine block. You don't want to bolt this in without this being lined up properly. You can actually crack this and damage this housing, or worst case scenario, damage the part on your engine block. You want to use very, very careful caution while you're pushing this back in. You can probably try to rotate the impeller to clock it, or spin the backside of this and just wiggle a little bit until it fits in place, and then make sure that you snugly push this up and definitely keep your eyeballs. It'll be positioned like this, where the 2 bolts at the top are the longer one, the 2 at the bottom are the smaller, that pushes this up against the block. And you want to just take a look and pay careful attention to make sure this part is seated up against the block section. And let's take a look so we'll have a better description. Down here, these are the bottom 2, and your upper 2 right up in there. Just make sure carefully that you can probably shine a light and make sure you're seated against these 4 points right here to make sure that, hey, you know your water pump is flush up in there before you run your hardware in there to tighten everything down. We're jacked up. I just wiped off the residual oil. We're not going for perfection, but it's fair, clean for the most part. And we're going to go ahead and remove the hardware just to double check and make sure we have our sealing O-ring in position. One of the great things that I do like about the newer assembly, I wanted to order some extra hardware. This, you want to make sure you have your E-sockets. The original hardware that came with this was the E8 that was in the original water pump. And one of these bolts, this had mushroomed out. This one's rusty pretty bad. A few of them was pretty difficult. They did come out, but it was getting a little risky trying to get this out with the smaller heads on here. My fear was snapping off a head and having the remaining part of the bolt stuck inside a housing. Luckily, the newer hardware is a little bit larger, so this is an E10. You'll need an E10 socket pretty much to fit on here to remove this hardware, whereas, as I stated, the original was the E8. So that's good. I do have the newer hardware that comes with this, as well as it's a little bit larger, which is great, and that will give a little more reliability for installation and removal in the future if I have to go there. I'm hoping I'm not. Hopefully this car right here will get the engine that I had planned years ago, which is a 4.2 liter with LA sleeved block that's already been sleeved. I have JE forged pistons. The compression's has been slightly lowered, and I have some custom forged rods to go into a build specifically for something like this. I was contemplating about either supercharging it or turbocharging it. We'll see when we get to that project. But yeah, I initially had plans to build a built 4.2 liter S5 years ago. I mean, years, honestly. When we finally get to that, we'll pull out some of the receipts and double check. The pistons and the block being sleeved and everything has to be at least 10 years old, 10 years old new, as far as 10 years old in age, but still fairly new parts. That 4.2 liter engine is sitting on a shelf upstairs in the assembly room, waiting for me to brush the dust off it and finally get to it whenever that will be. But that will be a nice project, ladies and gents. A built for, and of course, several people have already built the 4.2 S5s and different things like that. But I want to add my own little touch with my own experience, and honestly, I know I can easily get 1,500 wheel horsepower out of something like this. I know it for a fact. It's in my gut. It's there. I know it. But either way, back to this. Let's let go of that future plans, and I'm not going to call it a dream because I know it can be reality or fantasy, whatever. But yeah, let's get back to this water pump. Take the bolts out and see if our gasket is in position. I separated the new water pump, and I'm glad to say that the O-ring's in place, as well as the hardware is still an M6x1, and it just has a bigger head compared to the original, which is a lot better. So that's great news, M6x1. And another major bonus is this also appears to have a metal impeller compared to the original plastic. So my other one I ordered, you can hear the difference in sound. Metal impeller, plastic. And let's just double check if I can drill this without making a mess with one hand. Get it to at least start. And let's take a look. See what type of material this is. That is plastic. Well, at least I know for sure. So then, let's take a look at this. This was advertised as a metal impeller. Let's see if I got burned. Let's double check and see. Try to stabilize this. Well, yeah. That appears to be plastic too. I was wondering about the color. So even though the person was saying that this is a metal impeller, that appears to be a plastic. Can't believe everything you hear. Wow. I like to kind of double check, and as we saw, we double checked, and we know this is plastic. But wow, it may be a more durable or harder plastic, but yeah, all plastic. I can see from the burrs coming off of there. That's no metal burrs, that is plastic. That is why a lot of times people will advertise things, and the color, usually a lot of times they don't take the time to paint metal impellers. There will be its natural color, but that had me a little curious also, even though the tone sounded different. But my instinct was like, let's double check this, and yes, that is plastic filings that was coming up off of here. Now that we have everything back together, that's a bummer that this was advertised to have a metal impeller, the one that I bought. That is crazy. What I would attribute the different tone probably coming from was this original one being cycled in 100+ degree, temperatures of hot coolant thousands and thousands of times, and this plastic probably got a lot softer being heat cycled so many times, and of course it would not have the same type of tone because the plastic would have pretty much been exposed to all the hot coolant and got a lot softer compared to the new one, which has not been through the same type of testing and build up and environment where it's been exposed to that type of coolant. It's fresh off the shelf and a brand new plastic impeller just pressed onto the shaft itself. But anyway, I guess everything wasn't a total bump altogether. You want to definitely pay attention to the connection for your thermal switch that controls or thermal assist for your thermostat itself. You can see right here, my original housing has a 90 coming off of it so that it doesn't interfere with the coolant hose. And this other one I bought comes straight out. So therefore, that switch, the connection point right there, would be in a pretty compromising position, which could end up damaging the wire or possibly puncture the hose right here with just constant vibration. The other aftermarket one that I did purchase, that has a 90 also. So what I'll do is end up swapping this housing out, and we'll use this with the 90 instead of this one. So we'll separate this part as well. Definitely do a thorough check before you purchase any of these products, because when I initially purchased this was listed for it S5 from 2008 to 2015, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, the applications are different. Of course, both has the drain connection right here for draining out the coolant, but you can even see where the hose itself is clocked differently. This one is more almost pointing in similar direction as this, and this is upright. Therefore, this is definitely a different housing, probably for a different application for the 4.2 liter V8s. But yeah, pay attention. Make sure when you look at the pictures that they advertise, and make sure when you receive your product, you get what is properly listed. This was listed for my S5, and as you can see, different housing, different connection points, as well as the other one that had false advertisement and advertised as a metal impeller. At least I do have my original where I can gauge and compare the difference, and you can definitely easily see that. I removed the plugs, and I kind of wanted to point out something very critical and important. Before you replace these O-rings, you want to definitely also pay close attention to your shaft. This is the hex shaft I was referring to that drives your water pump. This can actually slide out of position. As you can see right here, I'm sliding it out. And if you make a mistake and have this slid out and you go to bolt your original water pump back in position, you can damage the gear that drives that shaft. And that would not be good. Imagine that. You would have to pretty much tear into your engine to do a replacement of that part, and you don't want to have to do that. So pay careful attention. Make sure this is seated back in flush. Therefore, when you go to push your water pump in, you don't damage the inside or anything like that. That's why I said this is very important and kind of critical, because you can cause potential engine damage. If you bust that up and metal drops down into your engine and gets in between the gears or the water pump or anything, your drive for any type of assembly on the inside, there it can be major damage. So that's something I definitely wanted to point out. We'll use a pick to remove our O-ring and install our new and get that out of position right here and take that out. And we'll remove the upper one also and install 2 new O-rings. As I stated, you do not want any type of metal debris or anything falling in there resulting in catastrophic engine damage. That would not be good, all for a simple water pump change. I'm using original hoses. They're pretty cheap. I really should have purchased newer ones, but we'll definitely pick up on some new hoses when we go for our next build in here, and hopefully everything will last until we get ready to put that built block back in there. One key note also, you want to clock your hoses correctly. You can kind of see right here the markings. This arrow right here, that's supposed to line up with this notch, as well as you have a arrow or slot, a notch on this hole, and it lines up with this slot right there. That way you can properly clock your hoses back in position. Here, there, there. I have my hoses installed before I put the water pump in position, and I pretty much squared the water pump up. I sprayed a little lubricant on this hose fitting right here, so that way I can tilt the water pump up into position and it can slide in on this upper hose, and then I can reach up in there with my hose clamp pliers, which is a very tight squeeze, and pull that hose clamp back down into position once everything's in. I want to slowly lubricate the back part of the housing also that slides into where the O-rings is, so that way it can slide in. And you don't want a dry fit. If you have too much friction, you can possibly push that O-ring right out of its seat and push it right into that port, and you have poor sealing. And when you go to crank your engine back up, you're going to have coolant dumping right back out because you compromise your O-ring seal. Those are things to pay attention to. And if necessary also, when you're squaring this up to make sure that your shaft lines up, you can try to stick your finger up in here and rotate the impeller to line the impeller up with the shaft, the hex shaft, and then slowly push forward while rotating this around to get this seated back up, so that this 4-bolt flange right here, the 4 bolts that pushes this back in, seats it against the block, those all seat nicely. I'll shine my light up and as I'm pushing this forward, as I stated, just to make sure I'm up against the block flush before I run my hardware in. I'm not going to just loosely run my hardware in and try to draw this in, because that's where you can damage everything. Tightly up into position, and then put your hardware in and thread everything in position. Those are a few key points that may have not been mentioned as far as swapping out the water pump on this style engine. Just a heads up note for those that are doing this themselves. That was a little tedious, but we're in position. I actually tilted my water pump back out just a little bit, sprayed lubricant on those two tubes that run inside, the one for the shaft drive for the impeller and the one that flows the coolant for the water pump. And I lined those up first in this corner and made sure they were lined up with the hose, and pushed this corner first and wiggled back and forth until I was pretty much, as we can see, let's shine a light back there, up against the block itself. That way I'm not taking any chance of bolting this in and not square it up. I also rotated my impeller around until I could feel my shaft stop spinning. Once I felt it stop spinning, I knew I was pretty much locked into position, and continued to wiggle back and forth until I heard it slightly just seated on into position. Once I heard I made contact with the block, I knew I was pretty good to go. I'm making some pretty good progress with the Audi water pump installation. I decided to go with stainless steel hardware this time for securing the water pump and the crossover tube. The upper two bolts, the lower two for securing the water pump, and of course the three, one right here and the double over here for the crossover tube. Now we're going to go ahead and prep to install the harmonic damper back in position, put my belt on, and continue to move forward. Hopefully the stainless steel bolts suffice to be pretty good. We'll see. It's pretty good quality hardware, and hopefully I won't have any problems in the future if and when I go back in here to remove some parts. Making some progress, have the new radiator installed. The connectors was a little tight getting in here. I ran into a few little problems. I ended up trimming off the top guide to at least get this to snap in a lot better. That a lot of times these fittings may have a piece that'll set up one way, like a locking key, where you can pretty much guide it in position, and that was sticking up a little high, so I got to file down the plastic just a little bit to get that to snap into position. And then of course, unfortunately, I ran into a problem with the return line for the expansion tank right here. This connector would not snap onto the fitting in place of the radiator due to the fact that unfortunately it was a little small. So this actually wobbled a little bit. That was the main defect that I noticed, and that is not good. So of course that would have been a major leak. I would push it in position and it would just pull right back out. Not good at all. I end up having to get a 90 and fabricate a 1/4 inch reducer and bring that over. So this is a heavier duty line. I think this line right here, if I'm not mistaken, is easily rated at 80-90 psi, so it's more than capable and very durable compared to the original plastic, which is very brittle. But what helped me out was I did have these spare connectors from off of the expansion tank, off of the radiator, and off of the return off of another S5 that was at a salvage yard. Ended up grabbing those up and it came in handy. I could have originally cut these off of my original one, but either way, if I have some spares, I'll keep this intact just for future reference. But so far, we're looking like we're at the position where we can go ahead and start adding some coolant to the expansion tank, and start the car up, let the coolant circulate, and try to see if we have any leaks. Now, currently we are looking good for the most part. The fan has cycled on 3 times since it's been running, and I'm steadily bolting on the pieces to get this front end put back together. But we are looking pretty good.